Hey everybody, welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. We are going to have a fabulous program and we are going to satiate the appetites of people who've always asked, I want to write a book. How do I write a book? Where do I start? And we actually have two wonderful, wonderful experts. We have Brenda Peterson, who is going to be talking about her experience, but also I want to plug her book, Your Life is a Book, How to Craft and Publish Your Memoir. And we actually did a wonderful program with Brenda before specifically about publishing a memoir. So go to www.firedupwithcj.com to see her share all her glorious wisdom. And we also have Sarah Jane Freymann, who's a literary agent, who's going to talk to us all about the process of getting your book published. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So,
Thank you.
it seemed like one of the things that people wanted to know, or give us kind of a broad 1,000-foot level view of what are the major steps that someone does from the initiating idea of I want to write a book to like what should I expect during the course of the idea all the way to book actually published.
Sarah Jane, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, I do. I would like, there's something I do want to say, and that is that one summer I gave a series of workshops. Mm-hmm. I did it because I thought it might be fun and it would make me some money over the summer. Mm-hmm. What I discovered, and this was a group of people, men, women, all ages, who decided that they'd like to take a workshop over the summer. Mm-hmm. What I discovered, to my surprise, maybe even shock, was that everybody had an extraordinary story to tell. Mm. Now, they weren't all writers. Not all of them were writers. Some were, some weren't. But the stories from the oldest person to the youngest person were riveting. Mm. And I gave them very set tasks to tell about a family meal, to talk about the dark family secret. And every family has one.
Yes, or
you
more.
Probably don't realize it.
Yes.
Or one, at least one.
Yes. Yes.
And the stories were amazing. Mm. I was glued to my chair and astounded, and I fell in love with everybody and with everybody's story. Mm. So that's what I want to say about starting to write, is that everybody has a story to tell. Mm. Not everybody can be published. Mm. I, as an agent, know that because I get a lot of books that can't be published for various reasons, and some can.
What books can be published, and like you said, everyone has a wonderful story. So what I'm hearing you say is write the story, but some will be published and some won't. Is there an easy way to figure out which ones will and will not be published?
Yes and no. If one is a writer, one writes. Mm-hmm. Writers like Brenda write. It's impossible for them not to. Mm. I am not a writer by profession, but when writing this book, I kind of entered into the stream, and everything I did seemed to connect to the book. Mm. Mm. So that I kept, in my case, because I'm tech phobic. I'm not tech phobic. I love technology, but I'm not tech savvy. Mm-hmm. So I kept a little dog-eared journal everywhere I went, and a pen, and everything related to the book. When I was walking, when I was working, particularly walking, working out, or cooking. Something deep occurred, and I would jot it down. I suddenly had a revelation, and I would jot it down. Now, people like Brenda, who are writers, they just send an email and it's a writing event. I don't do that. That doesn't come naturally to me.
Brenda, tell me a little bit about your process in writing, and everyone has a different way of actually writing and recording their ideas. I love Sarah's idea of like just carrying. I'm just imagining her with a little, little pocket full with of her beautiful notes. How do you where do you put all of your thoughts? And there's software that's out there. There's all sorts of different things.
Right.
How do you capture all your ideas?
Well, I am a rabid note taker, and I also love technology. And I have on my iPhone an app that NPR uses called Vodio, Voddio.
Uh-huh.
And all of my students now use this app in our classes.
Uh-huh.
They tape record the feedback, they tape record the criticism and the pleasures and the congratulations. And they often go home and listen to that 3 and 4 times, because when someone is giving you feedback, like Sarah Jane, I hate to say this, Sarah Jane, but I always tape record you. Because I know it. Remember, my mother used to work for the CIA, so I have these wiretapping.
Shouldn't you announce that before we speak?
I think legally you should. This is her post announcement.
Legally you should, right?
I think I don't just tape record our conversations like we had yesterday. I tape record your feedback, because you'll say something like, "Oh, this memoir piece needs 3 different layers. It needs more of the collective. It needs more of the outer world. It needs a historical setting." And while I'm grappling with all of that, you'll say something brilliant in the next line that I will miss because I'm still processing what you've said. So I always tape record, and I advise any writer, if they aren't very good note takers or their handwriting is hideous as mine is, to just tape record. Some of my students use an app called Scrivener, Scrivener, which is actually software you can download. It has editing tools. Something that I love to use on my Word or my Pages files is full view, because we're going to talk about this in a minute, but the distractions of trying to be a writer are so multitudinous at this point that you have to find a way to get the noise away, even the visual noise of pop-up windows that say, "Do you want to Skype?" Or pop-up windows that say something like, "You've got a package at your mailing place." Well, that's the last thing you need when you're tracking some very difficult memory or trying to understand something about self and others. So one thing you asked at the beginning about the overall steps, and Sarah Jane gave some really good examples. I always ask a new student, what is it that you can contribute that is yours alone? What stories do you know? What insights do you have? What background do you have that is just something that you know, privileged information that you want to share in your memoir? And start with that. And Sarah Jane has a fabulous thing about where to start. I'll turn it over to you, Sarah Jane.
Oh, I always say, it doesn't matter where you start, because wherever you start, you'll end up where you're meant to be. The story within emerges, but it doesn't always emerge immediately. People always think they have to start at the beginning. There's a tendency to want to start at the beginning and go to the end. It doesn't happen that way. Life doesn't happen that way. Experience doesn't happen that way. And memory doesn't happen that way. So sometimes the most vivid scene that you see is where you should start.
Yes.
That's interesting. And I've seen all sorts of stories where they interweave different perspectives from different time periods. And I enjoy those stories. Sometimes get confused, but where they interject, they start in the middle and then they go to the end and then they go to the beginning and they go to very different perspectives of different people. Interesting. Okay. I want to follow up on a couple questions that you said about feedback.
Yes.
Because I think that you had mentioned that you record unknowingly to Sarah. You can talk about that later.
Talk about secrets.
We will.
Okay, so you record her feedback, and so you have an agent that actually you work with in getting feedback.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what agents do and the kind of, I'm not familiar with an agent. So what does an agent do, Sarah? And what are in what ways do you work with the author?
Well, everybody, including professional writers, particularly professional writers, need another set of eyes. Mm-hmm. Everybody needs an editor. If there's nothing else that you come away with from this discussion, it's that you need an editor. Everybody needs an editor. Mm-hmm. And the editor shouldn't necessarily be a family friend, your husband, or a close friend.
Yeah, Lord help us.
Lord help you, because they either say you're brilliant, or it's someone who is jealous. You need someone who can fairly judge. Mm-hmm. I was very lucky to have a husband who is an extraordinary editor and who doesn't think everything I say is brilliant. Far from it. So he was ruthless, and that's what you want.
A ruthless editor.
You want a professional who is kind of ruthless.
Whoa, okay. That could be my
loving,
mom.
Compassionate.
Loving, okay,
but
got
ruthless.
It. Loving, compassionate,
kind,
but ruthless.
Yes. Who thinks that ultimately what you have to say is of value, but who has no particular vested interest in how you say it. Someone who can fairly judge. You need a literary friend. And that's often what an agent is.
Yes.
An agent has to first fall in love with your, I hate to say it, with your query. And if you can't write a beautiful query, you can have the best story in the world, but no agent is ever going to see it.
So when you say beautiful query, it's like they're pondering in their writing a specific life question. Is that what you mean by a query?
A query is the letter you send. It's basically a pitch letter for your own work.
Okay.
It's the letter you send to an agent or various agents saying, I've written this book, etc., etc. It shouldn't have spelling mistakes. It shouldn't have... You need someone to vet it.
Okay, so an agent has to fall in love with the query, which is your initial pitch to the agent saying, "Hey, I would like to work with you," and then if if the agent says, "Oh, I love this," then the relationship is
I think I might love it.
Oh, okay.
Send me more. Send me a proposal, or send me the manuscript. Send me the story, because there's a difference between fiction and nonfiction. Right. Between what you have to deliver.
Okay.
And if the agent basically falls in love with most of the material, not everything, you don't have to have it perfect, but the concept and the voice have to be something an agent is going to fall in love with. And then an agent hopes that if they have fallen in love, an editor will.
Okay, so Brenda, tell me about the process. So you actually had an idea, and I don't know if this is maybe the very first time. I don't know if you still do this with Sarah, but you have an idea. You sent the first pitch letter to Sarah. Was the book already written? Did you only have an idea and you sent the query letter? What was the process that you used from I have a great idea to connecting with Sarah?
Actually, I no longer send pitch letters to Sarah.
Okay. I'm talking about the very first time.
But some of the writers I work with do.
Okay.
And in fact, we are working with several of my students who have submitted to Sarah Jane. And one of their pitch letters I worked on in class, and it actually made it into our book. So if you look at Sarah Jane's perfect pitch letter that's in Your Life is a Book, you'll see a great discussion of what it should look like. It should be brief. I always say a pitch letter, being very well written, should also be like a carnival barker who says, "This way to the big tent." A teaser that's just really, really well written.
Right.
I had someone pass a book to me the other day and asked me to pitch it to Sarah Jane. And I said, well, okay, you're going to have to look at our book, write a perfect pitch, run it by me, send it to Sarah Jane. And I think she must have spent 5 minutes. It was so casual. It was disrespectful. It really did not in any way show her. Think of a pitch letter as a job interview. You wouldn't slouch in your Birkenstocks and your jumper to a job interview. It's your face to the public, as my editors used to say at the New Yorker, where I worked as a young person. It's your face to the public, and agents are incredibly busy. I've been at Sarah Jane's house visiting when there's 50 manuscripts that arrive during 1 week.
Oh my goodness, Sarah! Oh my God.
Actually, there are more, and these days they come online. They're not physically taking up space in my office.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, got it. So the process is, though, you have an idea, and when do you start writing the query? Is it after you finish the whole book, or when you have just kind of enough of an idea to say, hey, is this the right idea? When do you start engaging an agent?
Well, I would say, because everybody wants to publish, even if they say they don't want to publish, at some point they do want to be read by more than their family and friends. And we can talk a little bit about self-publishing at some point. There's a whole section in the book about that. But basically, if you're writing nonfiction, you can sell the book, as Sarah Jane has called it, on the half, which is half written, a proposal, an overview, a kind of bio, a marketing thing, and 3 or 4 really good chapters with an annotated table of contents. And that is about a 70-page book proposal, and that would go to Sarah Jane if you're writing nonfiction. If you're writing fiction, you have to write the entire novel.
Oh, no!
Editors do not trust us novelists. I did a novel called Duck and Cover, which was a New York Times Notable Book of the Year with HarperCollins. And in my proposal and talking about it, I said, this character is blah, blah, blah. And when I wrote it, the character got cut.
Nope.
and the editor wrote and said, wasn't there another character? So they do not trust us, and probably rightly so. So you have to write the whole thing.
Okay, got it. Okay, so then you actually write a proposal, and then, and you're saying that there's this perfect pitch letter that is in your book, Your Life is a Book.
It's in section of our book.
Okay, got it. So there's so in this book that you guys wrote, there is a section in there. Now, you actually have, so Sarah, you have a book, you love it, you fall in love with the whole premise of this book. When do you start shopping around? And I mean, in an agent, I just imagine you having this gigantic Rolodex, like, looking at all the different cards and trying to figure out who you're going to connect with.
Yes.
So, when you got Brenda's first book, or even a recent one, what book that you've been working on, what was the process after that?
Well, the same way as an author has to pitch an agent, I, as the agent, any agent, has to pitch, I don't call it pitch, I call it cover letter, has to pitch an editor or editors. We have to go through the same process. We have to make the book sound really tempting. Because an editor will take a look at this pitch letter, and I include always a proposal or a full manuscript. By the way, in terms of a full manuscript, Brenda said she doesn't write pitch letters anymore because she's written enough that she can refer agents to previous books.
Ah, I see. Got it. Okay.
Yes. So she doesn't have to start from the beginning. But as an agent, I have to start from the beginning with every author and say, you want to read this book. You want to read this book. And it's the same process as an author goes through. And I get rejected. I mean, it's exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And then when you actually get rejected, which I don't really know what percentage of the time do people get rejected and accepted. I know you have like lots of award winners. Really? Like what's the percentage if you were to make a guess?
It's certainly more than 50%.
Wow. Okay. Great.
Oh, yes.
And in your book, Your Life is a Book, I recall these wonderful rejection letters from very famous authors.
Famous people. Everybody gets rejected.
So don't take it personally, right? So when you get rejected and you think, oh, they didn't like my book, what to do next? I mean, what do you do when you're in that situation?
You go out and have loving people commiserate with you. And say
you go out and have a cake.
Or you come to class and you read your rejection and everyone says, is there something in that note? If an agent, Sarah Jane is an editing agent, not just a processing or an acquisitional agent, she actually will say to someone, you need to do this, this, and this, and see you in a year. Because that may be how long it takes. But we have a whole chapter in the book on handling rejection. And it really, think of how many people spend their lives getting rejected. Very few. They try to avoid rejection at any cost. But artists, actors, writers, anyone who's in the arts has to learn to have both a tough skin to survive rejection and a sensitive skin to be a true artist who can perceive the world with all of your senses. So it's quite a balancing act to be able to do both of those. But we have some hilarious rejection letters in our book that were written to very, very famous people.
Yes.
And it's just part of the process. In fact, one of my students has wallpapered her bathroom in rejection notes. And now she's getting published quite regularly. But it was kind of a badge of courage to get these rejections because she felt professional. And it's part of the profession. It's our professional hazardous duty, and we don't get paid for it.
It's almost like you have to put yourself out there. If you don't put yourself out there, then you don't get the rejection letter, but you're also not putting your craft, your art, what you have to express out there.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what I think.
Who was it who said, it was a coach, a basketball coach, I think, who said 100% of the baskets you don't throw don't get in the basket.
Right. Exactly.
That's true.
So you have to be willing, like actors. When it came to this chapter on rejection, the people I asked were not other writers, they were actors. And one of the actors I asked said, you have to acquire a kind of fierceness and take rejection as a challenge, develop a kind of to hell with them and I'll show them attitude. By the same token, I always say, learn from rejection. There's a Buddhist saying that if 3 people say you're drunk, sit down.
And don't drive. There's a wonderful passage in this Handling Rejection, chapter 20, on page 231. I want to read because it's from Sarah Jane's friend, the actor Cynthia Adler. And she says that the way you handle rejection depends to some extent on early family dynamics and also on whether or not you learn to be resilient. As a child, were you accepted, loved, and encouraged no matter what? Did you grow up to have a strong inner core of well-being and self-worth? If not, has life taught you to be courageous and not to give up? Cynthia says, persistence is everything. And I want to add to your first question about the steps in writing and publishing. I would say patience, time, good readers around you, really giving yourself a kind of apprenticeship to the craft. Even though you can write a letter, it doesn't mean you can write a book. I have so many students on my waiting list who really think that they're writers, and they're not. They're just people who want to write. And I always say to them, are you willing to give 5 years to your memoir? Because that's pretty much what it's going to take for a really publishable memoir.
Wow. Okay, here's the thing that so I've had various friends of mine. I want to write a book, I want to make. Okay, and what I've noticed is that someone has an idea, they start writing a book, and then of course, I think they change, therefore their book changes. And so there's this kind of moving target of writing a book. And if you don't really have a deadline or an imminent deadline, this book is this constant, it's just basically a gigantic diary that you write as your life evolves and keep on editing and re-editing it. How do you get yourself from, and then during the writing process, to just stop and say like, okay, I could rewrite and write this book for like my entire life, but I want to get published. How do you kind of put the brakes on yourself?
Well, Sarah,
Brenda, do you want to?
I'll let you take that first.
Okay. I think that if you're writing, it depends if you're writing a novel or if you're writing a memoir.
Okay.
If you're writing a memoir, you have to find a way to give more to the reader than you are getting for yourself. So you have to start. I personally, I like starting with an outline. An outline is different to a synopsis. An outline is something the author uses. And it's not a synopsis in that it's not meant to be read by the general public. It's for you. And, I always say to authors, you can write another book. Write one good book, and you'll write another one. You don't have to put everything you've ever heard and everything you've ever known into this one book. That's something important to keep in mind, that a book has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you write an outline, you may not stick to that outline, but you know that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Right, and I see so many actually.
It's like a template.
Yes. I see so many books where there are 3 books. I'm like, this is like 3 books in one book. It's almost like confusing to me as a reader when I read 3 books within one book. And so there is a beginning and middle and end, and a beginning and middle end, and a beginning and middle and end in each of those 3 books. But it's confusing to me as a reader when I see that. So
is this fiction, CJ?
No,
is
nonfiction.
It fiction or
nonfiction?
Nonfiction.
Yeah, and it's just like, I don't know what you're trying to. I'm just get confused when I read books like that. But so, give me an example of a beginning, a middle, and end, an outline that would keep you kind of at least. I'm hearing it as almost like keeping you roughly in line, so you don't start writing the second book as you're writing the first book, or jotting notes maybe down when you have the second book in hand.
Well, I'll give an example of that.
Okay.
With my memoir that Sarah Jane edited and helped me on called I Want to Be Left Behind, which is a dark comedy of family and faith. It's kind of, Sarah Jane came up with this fabulous cover letter that ended up on the flat copy, and it was a great soundbite, which was Deep Ecology Meets Fundamentalism. Which I credit Sarah Jane with that brilliant soundbite because I used it on every radio show I was on. And it helped me. She came up with that pretty early on in our process, and it helped me get a sense of structure. And structure is really something Sarah Jane calls an outline. I just call it quilt pieces until you find the pattern. But structure gives you at least the illusion of safety as you write your book. And sometimes it really can hold you like a container. And one of the structures that I always say is, can you begin in the present and flash back to the past? Which is what I've done in both my memoirs, because I wanted the reader to know that I had survived. Intact, I think, and with a sense of humor and a sense of joy about my life, because there are the kind of memoirs that Sarah Jane calls misery memoirs. And they are, I got hurt, I got hurt, I got hurt. And you know from the fact that this show has a lot of spiritual listeners that a part of one's life is to understand what you do with your pain and suffering. You don't just pass it along as unprocessed pain. Mm-hmm. You find some meaning in it. You find some hope. You find some raison d'etre. You find something that you can offer to your reader, because Sarah Jane is always saying, it's not just in a memoir how you grew and changed. It's how you helped others grow and change. Mm. And so that is a structure that has a beginning, middle, and end, because it might start, as I did in the present, as a survivor of fundamentalism, flash back to the past, and then work back up again to the present. And that is a really great structure for any of you all thinking of memoir. Sometimes you might want to start at the very moment of impact, a high point of drama, which is for one of my Japanese American students when she was called to go to these horrible prison camps because it was World War II and we were at war. And so she kind of starts with that moment of high drama. So if you can figure out, and a lot of times you don't know this until you have actually written a lot of different quilt scenes. And I showed your audience this last time.
Yes.
I'm going to show it again.
Yes, I love it.
My students love this, and I always show it to them. Let's see if I can show it to you here. This is a giant triptych. I'll back up a little bit so you can see more.
Wow, yes.
It's a giant triptych, and every one of those sticky pads is a scene, because I did not exactly know the structure until I had written about 5 or 6 different scenes. And in fact, when Sarah Jane sold the book, it was just about 50 or 60 pages that were not in order. They were not in chronological order. There was one from childhood, one from adulthood, and one that I think would be at the end of the book, to give a reader a sense of the narrative arc. So I'm going to let Sarah Jane explain narrative arc, because editors are always demanding that for all of her writers. Yes? Yes?
Narrative arc is basically what it sounds like. It's a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it doesn't fall at the end. It doesn't ever fall down. It rises up. And we all have our little preferences. My preference is to start in the present, at a dramatic moment, and to end at that same moment, having learnt, having delivered the promise. Every book makes a promise to the author, even if it's unspoken. Having delivered that promise to the reader, the book ends where it started, with the promise having been delivered. So it makes a full circle, but comes back with both you and therefore the reader having learned something.
Now, do you specialize in memoirs? Does an agent specialize in a certain genre or type of book? Because this definitely sounds like it makes sense for memoirs. I'm wondering whether it makes sense for nonfiction, fiction.
I don't. Actually, I used to specialize in visual material and visual graphic books. Then I specialized in spiritual books. I've done a lot of spiritual books. And now, as a result of this book, everybody who has a memoir is sending it to me. But I like narrative nonfiction. We do a lot of fiction at the agency, but it's mostly young adult fiction. Although I have just taken on a book of fiction by an incredible writer who actually wrote a diary. This is a wonderful story. Assuming that the diary was written by Lolita.
Oh, fascinating.
You know Nabokov's Lolita. She has written a book written by Lolita.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, got it. So
I know.
So you actually...
CJ, could I just answer a few questions that are popping up from your
Yes.
listeners? Because
Yeah.
I don't want them to feel that they are being ignored, and I
Okay.
appreciate that they've written in.
Yes.
So here, I'll just answer them very quickly in the order received. Do all writers need an agent? All writers who want to be traditionally published, yes, you need an agent like Sarah Jane. And if you are not going to traditionally publish and you're going to self-publish, you must have an editor, someone who makes you not look like a fool in public, and maybe a reading group or a class or something to vet you before you go on publish on Amazon or wherever, because you really know that those books will be around forever and you want them to be as good as they can be. So number 2, do editors control your work? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. My editors are the best in the business. I'm very fortunate to work with them. Mary Lloyd Lawrence at Perseus is a dream agent. She's brilliant, she's succinct, she's very nurturing, and she has hands off until the book is in her hand. And then she suggests. And we have in our book interviews with wonderful agents, which you would never meet in New York because they're busy. So you would
Editors, you mean?
Editors, yes. We have interviews with editors and agents who are wonderful and the best in the business. Marlene Blessing is my editor for 30 years, over 3 or 4 different books. She's my first reader. Sarah Jane said something about polishing that I want to say. There are editors who are really good in a final draft, and there are editors who are really good in a first draft. They're like cheerleaders. Yeah, you've got it, keep going. They're content, big picture editors. Then there are more editors who are saying, this is not polished enough, you need to refine it. I would say that Sarah Jane is a refining editing agent, and that you wouldn't send anything to her that hadn't been already edited by a freelance editor or someone else who was a professional. And answering another question, all books don't take 5 years. No, dear listener, they do not take 5 years. I gave that example because I want you to take it seriously, the process and how long and how many drafts a really good book takes. All the Light We Cannot See, which is a huge Pulitzer Prize-winning book, the author spent 10 years on that novel, and it shows in the craft and the beauty of the writing. If you are a professional writer and you have nothing else to do but write, your book may take a year. I have a book due in 9 months, which is frightening, but I will make that deadline because I will be disciplined and make the time. So, no, it's just a kind of ballpark so that you will take your writing more seriously.
Got it. Okay, any other questions that you feel compelled to look at? Thank you, by the way, for looking at those. I didn't know you could see them.
Let's see, our audiobooks on the table. Sarah Jane and I actually went to Florida. We met together and spent $500 for 5 minutes of an audiobook proposal. And those audiobooks, well, Sarah Jane can explain the market better than I can, but they're rare. Audiobooks are rare.
Okay. Someone asked, how much does it cost to get started, and what should be the first thing to do to get started? And I think I heard you say, like, write your story. It kind of depends, right? If you're writing a nonfiction or fiction, you have to write.
How much does it cost?
Yeah, what do you mean, how much does it cost?
I think it's actually, if you work with an agent, what I read was it's 15 to 20% commission off of, because the agent...
Yes, but an agent makes nothing. An agent makes nothing until and unless they sell the book. And then they make 15% of what you make.
Right. Off of the actual sales of the books.
Yes.
After the advance and the sales.
Right.
An agent doesn't get paid. And in fact, you have a question here about a reading fee.
Right.
No good agent charges a reading fee.
And that's it. And when I was reading on the internet,
someone
reading
is
something.
charging a reading fee, stay away from them.
Why is that? So just for people who aren't familiar, the reading fee is someone actually taking your book and reading it, and then I assume providing
for a
feedback.
fee.
Yeah.
For a fee.
And so why are they kind of like a red flag for you?
Because no decent agent, an agent is looking for clients, not to make money off them, but to have a wonderful book. So there is a temptation if you read books for a fee to read the book, give feedback, and not take the book on.
Ah, I see. If you really love it, you'll take it on.
If you really love it, you'll take it on. And no good agent ever charges a reading fee. Maybe they should, but they don't. And as for the 20%, that's for movie agenting, and it's 10% to the agent and 10% to the movie agent, to the film agent.
Okay, got it. So that's a kind of different things depending on what what kind of material that you have. Okay, so I think we covered a bunch of questions about reading and what you look for and the importance of an editor. And then I wanted to ask a little bit about publishing because, there are people who are like, I'm just going to write Random House with my book idea. What's the likelihood of, and I heard you saying earlier, Brenda, you need an agent, especially if you're a first-time publisher. But do those, in what instances does that work, or does it even work to write the publisher directly with your book?
Almost never.
Okay. Okay, that's easy.
You've heard of gated communities.
Very unlikely.
Okay, and why is that?
Well, because an editor likes to know that the buck starts somewhere. It doesn't stop at the agent, but it starts at the agent. So if an agent has approved of a book, somebody they respect, it means that at least one person thinks this book is good. They're not reading over the transom. They're not reading absolute junk. It so happens that sometimes an agent does send out, but it's unusual. It's unlikely.
Okay, so the whole idea of this, and on the internet there was, you need to submit a book proposal. Is that a book proposal to a publisher or to an agent? And they talk about the book proposal.
To an agent.
Okay, so the book proposal is the query letter that you referred to before, which is the things that we mentioned.
No, it's not.
Oh, it's different. Not. Okay. What's a book proposal
There are
then?
two different things. A book proposal is very specific, and we explain exactly, I will tell you what it is, but we have a very detailed outline of what needs to go into a book proposal on page 192 to 194 in our book. And a book proposal is comprised of an overview, in other words, a mission statement. Right. My book is about the author. I mean, if you have incredible social media, like you, CJ, you would put that you have this website and you have the interviews, and you make the most powerful case for yourself that you are able to.
Right.
3, you have what books are competitive, what books are like yours. And if yours is unique, it's fine to say that. There is nothing like my book out there. It's rare, but it happens.
Right.
Then you have a table of contents. The proposal can take months to put together.
Yeah, it seems
then
like
you have a table of contents, which is chapter summaries. And you have a paragraph or so on chapter summaries. Then, if you can, you have a page or word count. When you expect to deliver this book. And an intro and 3 sample chapters. You also ask if one can get help writing this proposal.
Right. Seems
hard. And the answer is
hard.
A big yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
Absolutely. And there are writers who are professional writers who cannot write a proposal.
They're hard. It's like a business mind. It's a different kind of mind, I would imagine.
Yes. And I teach so many people now who we are just writing proposals.
Wow.
Which means that they try to sell it and then they try to get a contract to write the book. And I would say out of the 30 people I teach every week in my classes, I would say that 60% of them are writing book proposals. And I always call it a hologram of the book. That you have to use that old word grok. You have to really understand the whole book before you sell it. Because if you don't have a grasp of the book, the editor won't, and they certainly will not buy it. But I want to say something about Your Life as a Book and what Sarah Jane is talking about on those pages. We actually published my book proposal in our book. So you have a model.
Right. Just what it looks like.
And I actually send that out to some of my students because it's a very specific formula. And there's a format to follow. So those people who want structure, who want outlines, who want guides,
They
just
can get
buy
that.
our book and take a look at how to do it. It's really, really simple and structured.
How many pages is you said 50 to 75 pages? Is that the typical length of a? That's
Yes.
long.
Yes.
That's so long.
Yeah.
Well, when you have the proposal, you have this, the proposal is the hardest thing to do of the book. And once you have a proposal, you have this, as I call it, the skeleton upon which the flesh will eventually go. You have a template. You have the basic structure.
Well, look at it from the editor or the agent's point of view, which is like, if you're cooking a meal, you think about people who are eating it, yes?
Right.
So many writers don't have any sense of the audience. I'll say to a writer like I did on Wednesday night, who is your audience?
Right.
And she had no idea who her audience was. She hadn't read books in her same kind of field. She hadn't really ever thought past her own tunnel vision, I got to write this book. So all of you listening, imagine someone reading your book. Imagine are you writing a spiritual memoir? You're listening to a show that has a lot to do with spiritual life. There's a whole chapter in our book on spiritual memoirs. We talk about pilgrimages. We talk about this wonderful idea of writing with the eye of God. We talk about, there's a wonderful story that I'm going to tell because it's one of my favorites about Sarah Jane editing one of my chapters in I Want to Be Left Behind. You know what I'm going to tell, Sarah Jane? She's a psychic
record
editor.
it.
Yeah, we can record it. I had written this chapter about Sarah Jane and I actually going to the inauguration of Obama in his first term. And we did so with my very conservative far-right family, and we were very liberal. So there were a lot of hilarious things that happened along the way. And I thought that would be great in the memoir, and I wrote it. And I sent it off to Sarah Jane to read and comment, thinking it was really finished and ready to go. And I had maybe 2 months left before I had to turn the book in to my publisher. And she called me up and she said, "Sit down, sweetheart," which you never want to hear that. And she said, "Let me tell you a story about my meditation teacher. When you're meditating, you hear this, you hear that, you get distracted by something in your past, you think about your childhood, you're hungry, and you hear a train in the distance. Don't get on the train." And I can't tell you how many times I'm writing and I'm going off on something I think is just wonderful. It's a big detour and I'm just writing away. And then I hear this little voice on my shoulder saying, "Sweetheart, don't get on that train."
Right.
And
that's funny.
I file it away under my save folder because one day it might fit someplace. But
Exactly. No, I get that fully and completely. That's why I write this. Before each show, I'm writing some structure.
Right.
Otherwise, I could go all over the place. And I want to actually make a correction because I said something incorrect. But what you said is the proposal is generally 25 and 35 pages long, and said now counting the sample chapters, which are often additional 50 to 75 pages. So I just wanted to clarify because I misstated that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it. So that's a lot of writing. So does one, you said if it's a fiction book, you write the whole book. But it seems like it would almost be a good practice to write the business proposal before you even write the book. So you even have a sense of who am I writing for? If I were running a business, what we usually do when we're running a business is rewrite the business plan first. But do you write the business plan or the book proposal before you start writing? That sounds stupid, but
I think it really depends on your temperament and your personality. I have an academic writer. She's a professor who wants to write for the trade, the general audience. And so she got a proposal, and it became so businesslike and academic and structured that it was awful to read. I mean, we just thought, what happened to that beautiful book you were writing that we've read 5 chapters of? And she said, well, this was a template that I got from a Harvard University book that sold to an academic press. I said, well, maybe you need to just think of this structure as something that will give you security. And in the end, you'll throw it all out because you really need to have the vision of the book first. I mean, CJ, maybe for you, if I were teaching you, I would say you're such a good marketer, you have a really great business overview, you have a very analytical mind. For you, I would say go ahead and write the overview and the table of contents and all of that to give yourself a sense of a roadmap.
right.
Because for me, I never do that. I write quilt pieces and then I figure out the pattern.
Yeah.
But I understand that that would be horrifying and terrifying for some students. So I always say, like I have several recovering journalists who want to write memoirs. And I'll always say to them, you know, it's fine if you want an outline. It's fine if you want to give yourself structure. Just understand that that will all change at some point.
Actually, it seems like I'm all organized, and I am, but it starts off like a chaotic mess. I mean, really, like if you had seen what I did to prepare and create this, there were many hours of looking and taking and sorting and whatever, but I think it kind of has the same kind of creative arc where I was all over the place, and then I thought, okay, get organized, CJ, and then I wrote, I'm showing you the questions that I used to actually prepare for the show, because it is a chaotic mess beforehand. And it's a creative.
They are excellent questions, by the way, and very pertinent, and as I said, pertinent and practical.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. I think we've actually covered. I find it hard to believe because I wrote all these questions. Like I don't really know if we're going to have enough time to cover everything, but I think we actually have covered virtually.
I have a few.
There's one thing I'd like to add.
Yes,
and that is, as it's Thanksgiving, one should be appreciative. One should never give up, but always be appreciative.
Yes.
And always be grateful.
Yes.
Kindness has its place in this business, whether it's kindness to the agent or kindness to the editor or kindness to your work. Be kind.
I love that. Unfortunately, we have to wrap. Can I actually get the things that you want to add, and we'll add it into. Make sure folks to go to my YouTube channel at firedupwithcj.com, and we're going to answer those questions that folks had, and also for actually touch upon those things that Brenda wants to add. Thank you, ladies, so much for being here. That was fabulous, and I'm sure you've helped people tremendously. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank
Everyone,
you.
have a great Thanksgiving.
Them for Sarah Jane was, do you take out-of-country proposal submissions? And I thought Sarah...
And the answer is yes, provided they're in English. I speak lots of languages, so people get confused, but I can only evaluate a literary work in English.
Okay.
Someone else asked, are books and movies the same? Are books like movie scripts? And I can certainly say not at all, because movie scripts are all dialogue with very little interior or description or setting. So they're a completely different animal, and you can benefit by writing just dialogue like a play, but most people who write memoir are not writing movie scripts. That's something else that's done entirely by someone else.
So I think we answered on how do we get started and things. I think we answered that. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
There were some questions that popped up so quickly when I was speaking that I couldn't even read them. So, I mean, there were tons of questions. And I didn't want to break from what I was saying.
Yes.
Because I would lose my train of thought to answer that. So I wrote most of them down, but you might want to check your do you have a record of those questions?
I do. Yeah, the right here. So the questions are, how do we get in touch with the editor, Sarah? How do we get in touch with Sarah Jane? How much does it cost to get started? We talked about that. Do you cover out of country? Does the book cover fiction? I think that's it. Were there other ones, Rebel?
There's one that you asked about publicizing.
Let me see.
About a publisher publicizing a book.
Right. Oh,
You
yes.
have about 2 or 3 months in which the publisher will publicize your book.
Mm-hmm.
But publishers tend to publicize a winning horse.
Okay.
In other words, if your book is selling well, publishers will continue publicizing it.
Okay.
It should be the other way around.
Yes, it does.
but
It doesn't
it's
make
not.
logical sense to me, but I get
It should be the other way around, but it's not.
Okay.
Publishers will go after a book that is selling well.
Okay. Okay.
And look at us now. It's been a year since Your Life as a Book has come out, and we're still doing publicity. So, it's the long tail. That's what they call in publishing, the long tail, which is, there are some publishers like Algonquin and Norton who really will keep publishing and publicizing your book for a long, long time. And Source Books is a really good example of that. But most publishers, you have 3 months. And then
that's it.
then you're on your own, which
And
is
what do they do actually for publishing? Like they hire them PR people then to publish your book? Or?
No, they have in-house or a freelance publicist.
Okay.
We had a fabulous publicist who's now left, Sasquatch, but she was amazing in just getting us interviews and PR and television and everything. She was great. But also, there's a lot you can do, on your own website. You can write articles. I write for the Huffington Post, and every time I do, my books are up there. People can click on them. So there's a lot of ways you can still support your books that have nothing to do with the publisher.
Right. But the old kind of fashion model where the publisher was really the publicity engine, that's no longer the case. You're kind of on your own.
That's no longer, no. That has changed.
Yeah. Any other things I know that you wanted? Did you want to just answer the questions here, or did you have other questions that you wanted to answer, or other points that you wanted to take?
I wanted Sarah Jane to say, because your audience, as you said in your opening, and what I see on your website, Deepak Chopra, Sharon Salzberg, it's a very spiritually inclined audience. I really wanted Sarah Jane to talk about her idea of writing with the eye of God.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
When I say writing with the eye of God, it means a higher perspective. It's not just your little world, which tends not to be so little, but it doesn't condemn anybody. It doesn't it's a broader perspective. Mm-hmm. It's the difference, as a teacher said recently, between reaction and I wrote it down.
Reflection?
No, not reflection. It's the difference between being reactive and being well, I will think of it.
Fill in the blank.
It's working with a kind of gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
I get it. I think of it from a spiritual.
It's working with a kindness, and not to take vengeance.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You never write to take vengeance.
Right.
You write. I mean, some people are awful, and they deserve to be awful. But you don't write with vengeance.
Right. You play from a higher
No one
perspective.
wants to read that.
Right.
No one wants to read that. You take a higher, yes.
Yes, yeah. It's like the difference between when you talk about the higher self and the little self. It's the small s versus the big S, which is the higher self from a meta perspective, is what I'm hearing you write from. So it's not just one of the things that Eat, Pray, Love. A lot of my friends don't like that book because they said it just feels like her just whining on about her pathetic life. in the beginning, and I don't remember the book.
In
But
the beginning.
in the beginning, but they
But
couldn't even get through it till the end because they were just like, "This is just a self-indulgent." This is friends of mine who read the book. This is a self-indulgent person, and I've read the book and I didn't feel that way. This is a self-indulgent person who's going whining on and on and on about her book because there's not really a. They just couldn't even take it. They didn't even finish the book because of that.
Hmm. So in the book,
But she's done pretty well.
I know, but I'm just saying that I get it.
in
Yes,
the
I do
book,
too.
it's on page 134 to 135. We write, sometimes we need a larger vision and a more generous understanding to look with compassion at our life and the lives of those around us. We call this writing with the eye of God. Stepping outside of yourself to better portray your character, going to the next spiritual step in imagining another's point of view quite distinct from your own. So that is what they call in fiction the omniscient narrator. And so you get this kind of meta perspective, looking at everyone as flawed and struggling just as you are. And that's what your friends might be objecting to in Eat, Pray, Love, that there wasn't that collective sense. It was a very individual book. And
it was whiny. It was whiny in the beginning.
Yes.
Small s.
A misery memoir in the beginning. Definitely.
In the beginning, yes. And she had no reason to be miserable. Right.
So she got a big advance for that book. Yeah.
Yeah, right. The notion was to, instead of being reactive, being responsive.
Okay.
And responsiveness takes a kind of inner thoughtfulness. Reactiveness is reacting immediately, like with Paris. I'm going to shoot the hell out of them, you know.
Yes.
And responsiveness is more reasoned and more thoughtful.
Like, why did this happen?
Yes.
Is there a precedent? Did we destabilize the Middle East? Are we, in our own way, responsible for this mass exodus? Those are the bigger questions that writers ask instead of just responding with a knee-jerk, we're going to kill them all. And when you do that, because of the spiritual perspective and the historical sense, you really get change and growth as opposed to just the repetition of the same old conflict.
Right, and you take the reader with you when you approach it from that perspective.
Yes,
exactly.
And it is that sense of omniscience. If we could be first-person omniscient narrators in our own lives, I assign my students to write this exercise of looking at a photograph of their younger self with fond detachment and using third person. So if it were CJ, you'd say, she was a woman with many ambitions and a spiritual calling that blah, 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 blah.
Right.
She wasn't without flaws, including blah, 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 but blah, 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 blah. So you see that third person, first person omniscient point of view gives you an immediate sense of writing with the eye of God. Great exercise for memoirs.
I love it. You guys are so lovely.
You.
That was so much fun. Okay, folks, we've been talking to Brenda Peterson and Sarah Jane Freymann, who are the authors of this lovely book. So many great passages in here. Make sure to get the book. If you're serious about being a writer, and I actually think it's, whether you're a fiction writer or a memoirist, this is still valid, don't you think?
It's all writing.
Yes.
And there's a lot of things on our website. There's Oprah, who picked up this book twice on Oprah.com. There's a lot of writing prompts on our website in addition to the book. But the book is really 30 years for both of us of teaching and agenting and editing and writing. So it's wonderful to have that, on your desk as you.
What a blessing. Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.